Hello, welcome to Presume Technologies. I am Venkat. This is part 5 of ASP.NET video series. In this session, we'll learn about the differences between ViewState, SessionState, and ApplicationState variables. In fact, this is very commonly asked ASP.NET interview question, and it's also very helpful for us to know the difference between these so that we can choose the right type of variable to suit our needs in an application development. Before continuing with the session, I strongly recommend to watch parts 3 and 4 of this video series. Let's look at an example. Let's flip to Visual Studio. Here I have a very simple ASP.NET web application project created which has got ViewState1.aspx web form, and on this web form I have two controls, a text box and a button control. And if you look at the code behind of this page, I have a very simple 6 to 7 lines of code here. Let's actually run this application and see what it's doing at the moment, and then we will walk through the code. Now, you have this text box and button control here. Initially, when the page is loaded, when it's the get request for this ViewState1.aspx page, a value of 0 is displayed in this text box, and I click the button once, a value of 1 is displayed. I click it again, 2, third time, 3. So every time you click the button, the clicks count is displayed in that text box. Now let's see how we have achieved this. To achieve this, we have actually made use of a ViewState variable here. Okay, so in the page load event handler for ViewState1 page, I have this condition if not is post back. If the request for ViewState1 page, if it's not a post back request, if it's a get request, then check whether if ViewState of clicks is null, and if it is null, store a value of 0 within that ViewState of clicks variable. And then what we are doing, we are using that ViewState of clicks to initialize the text property of textbox1 control. So here ViewState of clicks is initialized to 0, which in turn is used to initialize the text property of textbox1. So when we actually request ViewState1.aspx, when we type the URL, press enter, it's like the get request for that ViewState1.aspx, so a value of 0 is displayed because that's what we have told it to do. And then when I click the button, what's going to happen? When we click the button, the ViewState1.aspx page will be posted back to the server. So a new instance of ViewState1.aspx page is created, and then the page load events gets fired again. And then this piece of code will not be executed because it is a post back request. Okay, we told this to be executed only if not is post back. So this piece of code will not be executed. So it will come to the button click event, and we know in ViewState of clicks at the moment the value is 0. So we are taking that value, incrementing that by 1, and then storing that value in clicks count variable, which in turn we are using to set the text property of textbox1 control. So you see a value of 1 in the text box when I click this button one time. And then finally, look at this. We are storing that incremented value back in ViewState of clicks. So next time when I click the button again, what's going to happen? At the moment, ViewState of clicks value is 1. So we are taking that value out, adding 1 to it, and then storing it back in the clicks count variable. And then we are using that to set the text property of textbox1 control, and finally storing it back again in the ViewState of clicks variable. That's why every time you click this button, the value gets incremented as expected. Alright, now let's add another web form to this ASP.NET web application project, and to do that I just right click the project name, add new item, and I choose web form, and let's call this ViewState2.aspx. So ViewState2.aspx, click add. That should add that web form. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to go back to ViewState1, copy the button and text box control, go to ViewState2.aspx, flip to the design mode, paste the two controls there. So the design of ViewState2 and ViewState1 is exactly same. Now I'm going to copy the code as well from ViewState1.aspx and paste that in the code behind page of ViewState2.aspx page. Let's do that. So let's go to the code behind page of ViewState2.aspx and paste. That's it. So if you look at this, we have two web forms, ViewState1 and ViewState2.aspx, which has got exactly the same design and the same code behind. So now let's highlight ViewState1.aspx, run this project. So we are on ViewState1.aspx page. Now I click on this page once, twice, thrice. Look at this. The value is 3 here. Now in the browser, I'm going to navigate to ViewState2.aspx just by typing in the URL of that page. Press enter. So the moment I navigated to ViewState2.aspx, look at the value of that you see in the text box. Okay, it's reverted back to 0. That's because ViewState variable of webform1 is not, ViewState variable in ViewState1.aspx is not available in ViewState2.aspx. So this proves that ViewState of one web form is available only within that web form. Okay, so when I click this button on ViewState, do look at this. At the moment, the value on ViewState2.aspx is 5, but the moment I navigate to ViewState1, look at what's going to happen. ViewState1.aspx, it's not able to use the clicks, ViewState variable on ViewState2 page. Whatever we have, on ViewState2.aspx, that value, you cannot refer to that same value on ViewState1.aspx. So basically the point is, ViewState of a web form is available only within that web form. Okay, now where is this ViewState stored? Is it stored on the web server or is it stored on the client? It's actually stored on the page in a hidden field, and we have looked at that in the previous video session. Okay, so it's actually stored on the page. So if you look at this, when I double click, click that, the value gets incremented. Now if I right click the page and say view source, there will be a hidden field called _ViewState. Okay, so this is the hidden field used by ASP.NET, to store the ViewState variable value. And if you look at the value here, it's actually, it looks like something encrypted. It's actually not encrypted. It's encoded. It's base 64 encoded. On the server, it gets base 64 decoded in the page init event and then loaded back into the variable or a control. Okay, so ViewState data is not stored on the web server or on the client. It is actually stored on the page in this hidden variable called _ViewState. So ViewState is stored on the page in a hidden field called _ViewState. Now because this ViewState is stored on the page, if you close the browser or if you navigate away from the page, so if you close the browser or you navigate from that page to another page, what happens? The ViewState will basically be lost. And that's what we have seen just now. Okay, so I'm currently on ViewState1.aspx. I click it 5 times. Look at this. I clicked it 6 times. The moment I navigate away from ViewState1.aspx to ViewState2.aspx, look at that. On ViewState2, it's showing 0. I click it twice, and then if I come back to ViewState1.aspx, look at what's going to happen. It's reset to 0. Why? Because once you navigated away from ViewState1.aspx to ViewState2.aspx, the ViewState data of ViewState1.aspx page is basically lost. Along the same lines, if you close the browser, again the ViewState is gone. Because why? That hidden field is stored on the page. That's the reason why you lose it when you close the page or when you navigate away from that page. Okay, and ViewState is used by all ASP.NET controls to retain their state across postback, and we have spoken about this in the previous session of this video series. Now let's look at SessionState. And to understand SessionState variable, what I'm going to do, I'm going to add a web form. Okay, let's call this SessionState1. So SessionState1.aspx and click add. So that should add SessionState1.aspx. Now while we are here, let's add another web form, SessionState2.aspx. So I'm going to add this session state 2.aspx, click add. Okay, so session state 1 and session state 2. What I'm going to do, I'm going to go back to view state 1, copy the design from there. Instead of copying it from design, I'm going to copy it from the HTML, which is much easier. So copy that, go to session state 1 HTML and paste it there. So on the page I am actually using the same design on session state 1.aspx as well. I'm going to view state 1 code behind page, copy that code. I'm going to paste that in session state 1.aspx. And look at what I'm going to do here. I'm going to change wherever I am using view state of clicks, I'm going to change that to a session state variable by just typing in session. Okay, and I'm going to copy paste that wherever I have view state. That's it. I'm not changing any other logic here. All I'm doing is, instead of using a view state variable, I am making use of a session state variable. And let's copy this code and paste it on session state 2.aspx as well. And then obviously we need to copy the design as well into session state 2. So I'm going to go back to session state 1, copy the HTML and paste that in session state 2. Alright, so now let's select session state 1, save everything, Control F5. So we are on session state 1.aspx page now. And look at this, I click the button once, twice, thrice. Okay, the value currently is 3. Instead of using, the logic is very much similar, except that in session state 1.aspx page, instead of using the view state variable, I am using a session state variable, session of clicks. Okay, so now let me navigate away from session state 1.aspx to session state 2.aspx. Okay, the moment I do that, look at this. Even when session state 2.aspx loads, I'm currently on session state 2.aspx. Look at the value, it didn't get reset to 0. Okay, it still stayed at 3. That is because session state data is actually shared across all web forms. We know that view state is available only within that web form. If you navigate away from that web form, the view state is basically lost, because view state is stored on the page. And view state of one web form is not available in another web form by default, whereas session state data is shared across all web forms. So I click 4, 5, 6, 7. Look at this. On session state 2.aspx, the value is 7. Now if I type in session state 1.aspx and press enter, look at that. It retains that value 7. Why? Because session state data is available across all pages. But then let me make another change. Let me go to web.config file, and then within web.config file I added this element session state underneath system.web element. I added this session state element, and if you look at this, I've said session state mode is equal to in process. We'll be talking about session state modes in a later session. And then I'm saying cookieless is equal to false. I'm going to convert this to true. Okay, so what we are telling the web server to do here is basically we are telling it not to use cookies for sessions anymore. Instead, use the session ID as part of the URL itself. Okay, look at this. Let's flip back that to false, and when I run the application, look at the URL. You only have, it's saying okay, localhost on this computer and a port number, and then / the page name. Okay, but let's go back now to web.config file and let's change cookieless to true, meaning we are telling the web server not to use cookies to store session IDs. So that means the session IDs are now going to be passed in as part of the URL. So if you look at the URL now, localhost, the port number, and then there is this S and then some alphanumeric number there. What is that? That is the unique session ID. How does the web server know where the request has come from? It uses this session ID. The web server uses this session ID to identify, okay, this request has come from the same user. Okay, so now look at this. I click the button once, twice, thrice, 4 times. Now I go here and navigate to sessions2.aspx. Look at this. I press enter, same session ID, so it is retaining the state even on session state2.aspx. So session data is available across all pages. But look at this. What I'm going to do, I'm going to change this to something else, or I'm going to completely delete this session ID from there. So the moment I delete that, look at that. All I'm doing right now is deleting. And notice the value, it's at the moment 4. The moment I remove the session ID and when I press enter, what's going to happen? The browser gives it a new session ID, and when this request goes to the server looks at the session ID and then it identifies, oh, wait a minute, this is not the same session ID I had before. So obviously this request is from a different user session. Okay, so obviously at that point of time, what happened to the value? Look at that, that got reset to 0. Okay, so session state data is shared across all pages but across a single user session. Okay, so you can treat of session state data as a single user global data, meaning for a given user the session state data is available across all pages for that specific user session. So session state variables are available across all pages but only for a given single session. Session variables are like single user global data. And session state variables are stored on the web server. They are stored on the web server, and session state variables are cleared when the user session times out. The default is 20 minutes and this is configurable in web.config. Let's understand what we mean by that. Now if you look at this, okay, let's copy that and put that in a notepad. So that's the session ID that we have, a unique session ID. Okay, now let's click 1, 2, 3, 4. Now let me even close that browser window. Okay, but then I have this session ID there, and let me go to basically localhost session2.aspx, for example. Now I get a new session ID. I just clicked it once, copy that, close the browser window. Now if you look at this, so the session IDs are different. Now if I copy the first one and then go back to the page, though I close the browser, since I am having the same session ID, when I press enter, look at this, it remembers the previous value, which is 4. So how long does the web server going to retain that session state data on the web server? Is it going to maintain that indefinitely? If it's going to do that, then at some point of time the web server is going to run out of memory. At some point of time it has to remove those values from the web server memory. So how does the web server determines when to remove these values? Using a timeout value in web.config file. So in web.config file, wherever you have the session state element, we specified the mode is in process, use cookieless sessions. Along the same lines, you can specify the timeout value, and this timeout value is in minutes, and by default it's 20 minutes, but you can change it. Now let's change it to 1 minute. Okay, and then let's run this application. Let's go to sessionState1.aspx. Let's close the existing browser window, run the application again. Now we will get a new session ID. Click once, twice. Now copy this, delete all the requests here. So the value for this one at the moment, it is 2. And then let me close this browser window and let's open another browser window, and obviously the moment we type in, I'm going to sessionState2.aspx page, but look at that, when I press enter I get a different session ID, so it treats this user differently. So I'm clicking once, twice, thrice, 4, 5, 6, 7, let's click it 10 times. So the value here at the moment is 10. Now let's copy that URL, paste that back. Now if you remember, in web.config file we have set the session timeout to 1 minute. Now if it's more than 1 minute now, this session would have timed out and that value would have been 0 by now. Let's see that. But if it's not over 1 minute, it should still be there. So I'm using the same session ID here. So when I press enter, the value was 2. Look at this, it became 0, meaning 1 minute passed, so web server has cleared that session. So session state variables are cleared when the user's session times out. The default is 20 minutes. However, this is configurable in web.config. Now, the important thing to keep in mind is that session state variables, are single user global data, which means they're accessible across all pages, but only for a given specific session ID. But whereas application state variables are like multi-user global data, let's understand that with an example. Okay, what I'm going to do here again, I'm going to add another web form. I'm going to call this application state 1. Application state 1.aspx. Let's add that. And let me copy that and add another web form while we are here. And let's call this application state 2.aspx. Okay, cool. Now what we are going to do, the same exercise, copy and paste the design and the code. So let's copy the design first onto both application state 1 and application state 2 pages. So application state 1, let's go to application state 2, copy the HTML there, and now copy the code behind. So from session state 1.aspx, copy that and paste that into application state 1, and obviously we need to modify that to use application state variables instead of session state variables. So all we do is replace application state, session state with application. So wherever you see session, replace that with application. That's about it. So which means we are using application state variables here. And let's copy this and paste into application state 2.aspx page. Okay, cool. So now let's go ahead and run this. Application state 1. So control F5. So now you see that we get a different session ID for this user. So let the page load. Look at the session ID. That's something 1, 2, 3. So the value is 3. Let me copy this. Now let me go to application state 2. So I am on application state 2.aspx, another web form, but the application state variable value is shared between these web forms. I click 4, 5, and if I go back to 1, I still see the same value, just like session state. But then another difference is, let's copy this, put that here. Now if you look at this, for this unique session ID that you see here, the value currently it's 5. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to copy that URL, open another browser window, paste that, but I'm going to delete that session ID. Look at that. If you remember, for this unique session ID, the value was 5. Now I deleted this session ID, and when I press enter, what's going to happen? This browser will get a new session ID, and when that goes to the web server treats that as a different user session. So at that point of time, let's see what's going to happen. So we will get a new session ID, and look at the value. We still have that 5. So if you look at that the same 5. Now this is what is the significance difference between, look at this URL and this URL. Obviously the session ID is different. Though they are different session IDs, they are still able to share that application state data, which means application state variables are available across all pages and across all sessions. You can think of these application state variables as multi-user global data. And application state variables, just like session state variables, they are also stored on the web server. And when does a session state variable cleared? A session state variable is cleared whenever the session times out. The default is 20 minutes, but that's configurable. But whereas application state variables are cleared when the process hosting the application is restarted. Let's see what we mean by that. Now look at this. We have set the session timeout to what? 1 minute. Okay, if you remember, that's what we have specified in web.config file. Okay, now obviously a session will time out when that time is expired, if there is that amount of inactivity period. But whereas application, look at this, it's definitely more than 1 minute, but still when I click the button, it has that application state data. So when will this value be lost? This will be cleared when the process hosting this application is restarted. For example, at the moment my application is running inside built-in Visual Studio development server. In reality, we host our applications in IIS. We will talk about running applications using IIS and built-in Visual Studio development server, how to configure them, etc. in a later video session. But for now, just understand that when I run this application, it is using a built-in development server, server within Visual Studio. Okay, so obviously if I right click on my task manager and select task manager and go to process, and if you select W there, you see that webdev.webserver, this is the process which is actually hosting my this is the executable process which is running my application. So if I restart this, or if I kill this, or what I can basically do is I can stop it from here as well. So development server, stop that. So obviously it is stopped now. Now if I go ahead and run this application once again, what's going to happen? It's going to start. The development server is going to start again, and now the value will be reset. So obviously when are an application state variables cleared? When the process hosting the application is restarted. So these are the differences between view state, session state, and application state. To be very precise, view state of a web form is available only within that web form, whereas session state data is available across all web forms, but for a given single session, whereas application state variables are available across all web forms and across all sessions. That's it for today. Thank you for listening. Have a good day.